Hey, and welcome to the Matt Willson Weekly Kickoff Show. I'm Mike Daggs. He's Gerald Smith. Week 2 in the books. Let's recap Week 2 briefly. We'll get into Week 3 and get the week started right.
I think all we need to know about Week 2 is that we got our first win of the season. We went to the fake LA. The real LA is Louisiana. So we went to the fake LA and then, beat them. And now we're home in a bye week, relaxing.
Yeah. The Aztecs didn't lose either.
We didn't play.
We were at home relaxed.
You guys are undefeated after 2 weeks.
Undefeated after 2 weeks, baby. At 1-0. Anyway. So what else happened in Week 2? Well, it started off last Friday night. Denver at Albuquerque. Albuquerque pitched a shutout, 23-0 over Denver. Kind of raised maybe some doubts about Denver. They looked really good after Week 1. Then Week 2 came around and they played a goose egg. So we'll have to see what happens. Here Week 3 and beyond. Canton recovered. You talked about Louisiana recovering and getting a win in Week 2. Canton, obviously trounced Pittsburgh 44-10. Vancouver, they just beat down on Houston.
I called it.
You did. Yeah. We'll get to the picks at the end. We're not there yet, Gerald. We're at the beginning of the show.
That's true.
51-24 beat down of Houston, who had looked insanely dominant in Week 1. So kind of a crazy flip of the script for a couple of teams. Fort Worth, they went ahead and just reasserted their dominance. I know you're going to talk at length about Fort Worth a little bit later on. 45-0, just a complete destruction of Carolina. Because you didn't talk bad about Carolina last week on our show. So guess what, Carolina? I don't think we heard. Well, you can say something disparaging about Carolina, can't you?
I can't. Not today.
Yeah, they're going to lose again then. We talked about your Revs back in the saddle, so to speak. I'm not sure if your two-legged green horse has a saddle or if there's even a spot to put a saddle.
We can put a saddle on. It's almost like a raptor. Put a saddle on it and ride it. No one rides a raptor.
It's a disturbing image in my head.
We can do it.
We'll just take your word for it. 24-10 victory over Los Angeles. Congratulations on that victory. And, of course, the return of the Monday Night Spectacular for the first time this season with Baltimore beating Indianapolis 38-20. So big wins by every team that won a game. 0 out of the 10 games last week were one-score games. I was kind of surprised to see that. In Week 1, we had 4 games that ended in one score, 2 of which were overtime victories. But every game in Week 2, a 2-score victory or more.
Well, people had film on other teams, right? So they were able to get a little bit of a look at the other teams and what they were able to do and what they may have been successful at. And it's obviously like teams adjusted.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's leave Week 2 in the rearview mirror. We'll get Week 3 started. Let's break down the schedule and talk about what games we have to look forward to this weekend. Starting tonight at 8:00 p.m. Eastern, we've got Fort Worth at Atlanta. Gerald and I will be calling that game. Looking forward to that one. Fort Worth on the road this week. Just destruction last week for them in their victory. Just putting up all kinds of points. We'll see what they can do. Atlanta kind of had a down week. They're back home now. We'll see if they're able to hold up against Fort Worth. But that'll be our game tonight on Friday night. Saturday, our slate kicks off at 6:30 p.m. Eastern time. Los Angeles at Nashville with Colin and Rick on the call. Can't wait to have them back. They took last week off. Heard them both, obviously, in the convention. But they'll be back on the air this weekend. 6:45 in that same block, Arizona at Chicago with Jacob Clear and John Warren. And then at 9 p.m., Indianapolis at Mexico City. Go Aztecs, Tyler and Brett on the call. Obviously looking forward to that one.
Yeah, and I do think that can be I didn't want to break it down because I didn't want to put that position this week, but I think this very well could be the game of the week.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Should be a great game. 9:15 in that block, Motor City at Lexington. It's the city block. We got Mexico City in one spot. We got Motor City in the other. Motor City at Lexington with Ethan and Anthony. Anthony Ellison with Ethan Muslin on the call. That's our Saturday breakdown. On Sunday, we've got at 6:30 p.m. Eastern time, Baltimore at Minnesota with Alex West and Rochelle Colston. Alex dabbling in the play-by-play arena again. Looking forward to having him back in that spot. Usually he's an analyst for us and going to be doing some play-by-play.
I'll take a listen. He's got I'll take a listen to it, and he has Rochelle Colston. So I think this would be a good, entertaining pairing.
It should be fun. Alex is a character. Yeah. Did you get a chance to meet him at the convention?
I sure did.
Did you cross paths with him? Yeah. Yeah. You're an interesting dude, Alex. It was great to meet you. You're a lot of fun. Vancouver at Canton is at 6:45. Eric Vincent, Petey Zeller on the call. And then at 9 p.m. Eastern, we've got Queen City at DC Dragons. Chris Curtis, along with Mark Lopez, two of my favorite people. 9:15 p.m. Bossier City at Denver with Cameron Duty and Eddie Gage. Two more of my favorite. They're all I love all those people in our. There's nobody on our broadcast team where it's like, man, I wish that guy would just pound salt and leave, except for that Cameron Irvine fella. But kidding.
He's kind of a scrub.
Yeah, he's only gets a call a week here and there.
His looks got him where he was.
So pretty.
Yep.
Anyway, he's probably cursing us out right now. But in any case, Bossier City at Denver. It'll be interesting to see in that game if Denver can bounce back from getting shut out. A couple teams getting shut out last week. Then, of course, the Monday Night Spectacular with Cameron Irvine, Charles Doherty. Monday night, 8:15 p.m. Eastern. Charleston at Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh at home this week. In the spotlight. 0-2. Interested to see what happens with them there. It's not one of the games we're going to break down, but just real quick thoughts on that one. Can Pittsburgh get it this week?
I don't know, because you actually have Charleston, right, who actually played really hot. They was off week 1, but they showed up big last week in their win.
And all last season. Let's not forget last season.
And Pittsburgh, for 2 straight weeks, they've been having a slow start and having some struggles. So I don't know. Maybe they figure something out from the previous 2 weeks.
We'll see. We'll see on the Monday Night Spectacular. But let's break down some of the games that we've got coming up this weekend other than that one. First off, we'll start with Vancouver at Canton. That's one of our Sunday games. Both of those teams started the season 0-1, but they both had not just victories, dominating victories in week 2. We talked about Vancouver already. They dominated Houston 51-24. Houston, we talked about it in our breakdown last week. They had 2 100-yard rushers in week 1. And not only did they not have a 100-yard rusher, they didn't even have a 30-yard rusher.
Yeah.
Out of their 2 dominating running backs, 29 yards was the most. So that I don't know if that speaks to a change in game plan from Houston or just completely speaks to Vancouver saying, I see your running backs and I know how to stop them.
Right.
But Canton, they completely dismantled Pittsburgh. They got up 10-3 in the first quarter. They just ran away with it, never looked back. Canton kind of took a page out of Houston's week 1 playbook and not only had 2 100-yard rushers, they had 2 150-plus yard rushers. I saw those stats and I was like, holy crap, that's insane.
Well, you know, excuse what I'm going to say here, but it's like video game type stats right there. It's something you just don't see from very competitive football.
So Canton and Vancouver, they've played each other a couple of times. Canton actually ended Vancouver's season 20 playoff run in the wild card. And then they played them again in season 22. They beat them down in week 4. So a couple of the last 2 times these teams have met, the first time they met, I should say, they've met 3 total times. Vancouver did get a win. I think that was back in season 19. But these last 2 games, Canton's had their number and they've had their number big. So I'm interested to see your thoughts on what you think Vancouver can do to get the win. So let's start talking about Vancouver's offense.
And this was the offense that I expected from Vancouver last week, you know, with the way that they played last week, right, and putting up 44 more points last week than what they did in week 1. And they defeated a very good Houston team. Look, and they put up a ton of yards, 457 yards of total offense last week. And after only having 176 total yards in week 1. So it was a huge change.
Yeah.
So they made tons of changes. And they also had 6 touchdowns last week, right? When they only had 1 touchdown in week 1. So quarterback Christian Brown threw 3 touchdowns, all to different players. He also threw for 225 yards. Fullback Mateo Privado had a career game last week with 161 yards on the ground, and the backfield had a combined 225 yards of rushing offense. And to add to that, right, wide receiver Lili Nakai actually had a punt return for a touchdown too, which actually helped them as well. So it seems like they may have figured some stuff out on offense, and this is the type of firepower that I'm used to seeing from Vancouver that I really expected in week 1 against a Carolina team, but they showed up against a huge, you know, a really good Houston team, and they just kind of blew their defense out of the water.
Yeah, and not only did they show up on offense and even special teams, you mentioned the punt return touchdown, but how about all phases of the game? Because the defense, they just showed up huge. Talked about Houston having 2 100-yard rushers in week 1, and week 2 against Vancouver, not so much.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And you already know I called the running back duo on Houston even last season, even though we replaced one too. They still, in my opinion, they still do have the two best running backs backfield, the
tandem,
duo, right, in the league, and they limit them to 44 yards total last week, right? And Houston, we all know, you mentioned it earlier, had 200 yards and over 200 yards in week 1, 100 from each person. The defense forced the opposing quarterback into mistakes with 4 interceptions and also got 2 sacks. If they play this week like they played last week, they are in for a huge payoff against a really good Canton team.
But let's get into that really good Canton team because they dominated last week too. They lost in week 1. I don't know if you almost can even chalk that up to a fluke because in week 2 they looked like regular old Canton form. So it's getting to Canton's offense.
And we know, look, Canton rolled over an expansion team in week 2, and they look like they did last season with the dominant run game that they have. But it was against an expansion team.
That's true.
Now, how much we're going to put into that? I guess
I think we'll find out on
50,
Sunday.
50. So, but look, let's give them credit, right? They ran for over 300 yards with both running backs, as you mentioned, getting over 150 yards apiece.
Yep.
You know, but let's look a little bit deeper into their offense. Their quarterback has not played great. In week 1, Score Patterson threw 2 interceptions, and he repeated that in week 2 by throwing another 2 interceptions.
Yeah.
He threw 7 total passes last week in week 2. And 2 of those passes
were
interceptions.
Yeah.
So it's like, but the run game was extremely good and locked them in for the win because it's just how dominant that it was.
It did, but does it make them one-dimensional?
Right. They will have to improve in the passing game. I'm glad you mentioned that. They will have to improve in the passing game. That way they don't become one-dimensional because we've already seen what Vancouver can do against who I call the best running back duo in the league in Houston.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I mean, if they get caught just, holding on to the run a little bit too much, and if they're struggling in the passing game, they very well may struggle this week.
Yeah, absolutely. The defense, it's a unit that's earned an undefeated regular season for them last season. So, the Vancouver offense has a tall task to go up against them as well. Talk about that defense.
Yeah. Not only did they have an undefeated, I think they were the reason why Canton win as far as they did and why they were so dominant because of that defensive unit.
Yeah.
Got them to a championship game, right? And they did it by pressuring the quarterback.
Yep.
They forced 4 interceptions and 7 sacks last week, and they lead the SFL so far this season with 11 sacks through 2 games.
Yep.
And it's all led by Kevin Bragg, who had 3
the blitzes
sacks
are deadly. Yeah.
and 2 forced fumbles.
Mm-hmm.
Last week, the defense unit is elite at every single level, and it can carry this team to victory each and every week, just as they did last season. So if this defense plays at an extremely high level and they can correct that passing game, they could be looking for a victory against Vancouver.
I know you think Mexico City Indy might be the game of the week. I'm kind of thinking this one might be. I mean, these are 2 explosive teams that both did really good in week 2. They both struggled in week 1. They're kind of following the same trend so far this season, still early on in the season, obviously, but the trend breaks for one of them this week, so I'm interested to see which way it goes. It really could go either way.
It's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, absolutely. And that game will take place on Sunday. Another game that's going to be on Sunday: Baltimore at Minnesota. Don't want to confuse Minnesota with Indianapolis. I'll have a Sasquatch come busting through my door,
or you have somebody else. You'll have a Rambler coming in here with.
Still don't know what that is though, so I'm not sure if I'd know it when I saw it.
It can be a person. It can be a car.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Who knows? Or just somebody that just keeps talking.
We need clarification.
Rambling on, blah, blah, blah,
we need clarification. Chad Rowland.
Rambler.
Thanks.
Sorry. Thank you. So let's talk about this game. Another 2 teams that both won in week 2. Minnesota, they had an impressive road win over Atlanta. Colin Hart had over 100 all-purpose yards. He had a touchdown, so great job by him. Baltimore, with their second home game in a row, now they're on the road. They did take down Indianapolis last week to go 2-0. Although Jack Wigmore, Baltimore quarterback, he threw 4 interceptions, but he also had 4 touchdowns to overcome it. I'm sure you'll talk about that. Looking at the team stats comparisons, though, Baltimore is just dominating in almost every category. Very few categories that Minnesota has that are better than Baltimore. Baltimore so far through 2 weeks playing pretty much better than Minnesota in every way. This is the 3rd time that Baltimore and Minnesota have met. They've met once in each city. Both teams have come out with a win. So matchup history-wise, doesn't really say which team might win. So let's break it down. We'll start with Baltimore and their offense.
Yeah, Baltimore is back to doing Baltimore thing. Winners of 2 straight now.
Yep.
But they, in my opinion, they have not done it, with finesse from a few seasons ago. One thing that they do love, apparently they love former Houston running backs because they got Warren Murray from Houston. Now they have GP Wells, who have each started out great this season and have been the strength of the offense, in my opinion. They have combined for over 100 rushing yards last 2 weeks. Both of them combined, they've actually got 100 yards rushing for their team the last 2 weeks. Former MVP quarterback Jack Whitmore has thrown 5 interceptions, which is second most in the SFL, but leads the league in passing. He is number 1 in passing yards. So you can't really complain with the results when you're sitting at 2-0 after 2 weeks and have the number 1 total offense in the SFL. So even with those mistakes that they have had in the passing game, they're putting up a ton of yards and everything else on offense, and it's gotten them where they are right now.
Yeah, and when you're slinging the rock like that all over the field, you're going to throw some picks. I mean, it's going to happen when you're throwing that much. So if you're leading in passing, probably going to be leading in picks too. So just kind of goes with the nature of the beast, I guess, as they say. So let's talk about their defense. So their defense has been a huge compliment to their top-rated offense, currently sitting at number 4 in total defense.
Yeah, and that's after 2 weeks. So and they pressure the opposing a quarterback as good as any other team in the SFL, and have 2 top linebackers with Frank Smith and Alvin Mack leading the way right there. They seem to be playing at already an elite level this season. So if their defense can get them in, and their defense has done extremely well so far for them and helping that offense get a lot more of the ball back and being able to allow them to put up a ton of yardage, and the things that they do. So look, if they can keep doing that on defense, they shouldn't have a whole lot to worry about, and it bodes well for them if they can have both the offense and defense clicking against Minnesota.
Yeah, well, we'll see what they can do against Minnesota. Let's get into Minnesota and their offense. They got back to doing what they do best on offense, and that's ball control.
Yeah, and when they control the pace of the game, they are usually very dominant, and that is exactly what they did last week. Quarterback Johnny Reno has one of the quickest releases in the SFL, which has limited defense's ability to get pressure on him or even apply anything. So look, and then you add in newly acquired wide receiver EJ Minson, team with T to Queen and D's of Power. It's such a dangerous wide receiver core that they have. The run game has also been solid with veteran running back Colin Hart, who I think should be a Hall of Famer, leading the backfield. Very balanced, and I think they are extremely underrated on offense. So we're going to look for them, and I think they've always been that, right? Nobody's actually touted like their offense and doing the things that they do because they don't have all these gaudy type numbers, with the exception of Johnny Reno having a high completion percentage. But look, and people need to give him credit. It's a very well put together offense.
Maybe a little bit of bias with Colin Hart, wanting him to be in the Hall of Fame, being, a player that's got quite a few of his stats under the green and blue.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all.
Let's get into their defense. The defense has been a tackle for loss machine through 2 weeks. Let's talk about it.
Up front is led by the massive human being, defensive tackle Max Knight, who has 3 sacks and an interception.
And a pick. Yeah, did you see that one?
Yes, I did. It was something.
That was a big pick.
It was quite amazing, right? And he already has that already on the season. So, and at the second level, you have linebackers Matthew Alvarado, who played in Mexico City, and Stephen Black, who have many TFLs, tackle for losses themselves, and have clogged up the passing lanes as well. And, so whenever they drop back to pass, they drop them back and getting themselves in the cover. The defensive unit has been the definition of a bend, don't break defense, right? Excuse me.
Did you just eat a pretzel?
I must have. I don't know.
Yeah, but the defense has been great, though. But they are facing the league's best offense. So it's gonna be interesting to see how they fare. Yeah.
So anyway, we'll see how they fare. Against this top-rated offense. So, and we'll end up seeing if they're able to, kind of stop them from doing, Baltimore type things that they've done the last 2 weeks.
Right. Yeah. Don't die. At least not on the air.
Probably not. Tell me what happened.
That game will also be on Sunday. Let's get into a couple of games from Saturday coming up. Los Angeles at Nashville. I got questions about this game. I think there's question marks all over it. Los Angeles is 0-2. Nashville's 1-0. They were off last week. Another expansion team. So what can we expect? LA, they looked good. Despite losing in week 1, they looked good. In week 2, your Revs were able to handle them pretty steadily in all phases of the game. Nashville, they certainly had a solid week in week one. They took down the DC Dragons, but they only put up 17 points. So was it all defense? Was it just a bad game by DC? There's not enough film from Nashville to really know. In LA, they started off last season 0-2 and beyond, 0-2 again. So, will LA get over the hump, or will Nashville continue to make a name for themselves in the league? Talk about LA.
LA has been a tough team to get a read on, right?
Yeah.
They play well at times and somehow seem to snatch defeats out of the jaws of victory. They
Right.
did it in week one,
Yeah.
right? So the offense has failed to execute when it matters most. Last week, they had plenty of opportunities, right? I'm in the box. I'm watching them this game play, right? But they just did not execute properly, and the game got away from them. They had the opportunity to do, but they just couldn't. Quarterback Sully Richard, who is number 2 in passing yards, has to clean up the unforced errors in the passing game, because last week he threw a lot of balls overthrown and off target, and he ended up throwing a pick near the end zone. It's sad to say, we didn't really apply a whole lot of pressure to him to force him into errors. So those are unforced errors by him, and they also need to get the run game going so Sully does not have to feel like he has to carry the offense to the passing game. So if they can start getting the run game going, he doesn't have the weight of the entire team and entire offense on his shoulders to produce.
Yeah, and the defense hasn't really been the best so far either. I know they rank near the bottom. They're near the bottom rush defense and third to last in total defense. Talk about that.
Yeah, so they are actually at the bottom in rush defense, right? So look,
True.
and they don't particularly pressure the quarterback very well either, which seemingly has limited their success defensively. But the good news is, on paper, this week they faced the last ranked total offense in the league in Nashville, even after 1 week.
Right.
So, and we'll touch on here later. So if there's any game for them to get themselves back into it, especially from the defensive perspective, they can do it, I believe, against Nashville.
Yeah, we talked about it already a little bit. Nashville, they had a bye week in week 2, but they were able to get the win in week 1. Break down that offense.
And the offense did not look very good in their week 1 win to me, right? They struggled to run the ball with only 2 yards of carry from all the ball carries. Quarterback Switch Thumper looked good in his debut and threw 2 touchdowns to help his team win. Right. But the entire offense had only 178 yards of total offense.
Yep.
Right. And that's not, we saw what Vancouver did with 176 yards. They got beat pretty bad.
Yep.
And here they are. They somehow won, right, with this type of offensive output. And I don't think it's because of the offense that they've won, but the reason for the low output was that they were only converting 35% of their third downs in week 1 to first downs.
Yeah, these aren't stats that are going to get you wins regularly.
No. Look, and when you're playing a team that I feel like is desperate in LA, you do not want to try and fix your problems against a struggling team, because guess what? They're going to start throwing a lot more, everything in the kitchen sink at you, and you don't know what to expect.
Their defense was pretty solid, though, in week 1. They forced the opposing quarterback to throw 3 interceptions, only allowing 40% completions. So, maybe the offensive production wasn't what you would want to see, statistically speaking, but the defense, not too bad.
Yeah, and the defense is what held them up and actually got them the win in week 1, in my opinion, right? And they have one of the most underrated linebackers in the SFL in Jay Mark. We know where it came from. He was in Alamo City, and he did really good things. His ability to go sideline to sideline, making tackles, and his coverage ability is something that is just, in my opinion, unjustly overlooked. Right? So far, he has had 5 interceptions each of the last 2 seasons.
I know.
With also averaging 19 tackles for losses over that same span. So, look, but can he and his teammates stop the number 2 passing offense in week 2? I don't know. We're going to find out. But the defense is going to have to step up to compensate for the offense. But maybe Nashville figured something out for week 1, bye week 2, and now playing in week 3. We'll see.
Well, we'll find out tomorrow night when that game kicks off. Let's get into the game that's kicking off in just a few minutes' time. We've got Fort Worth at Atlanta. This is going to be Marcus Dunhill playing his former team, Atlanta, for, believe it or not, the very first time since winning the title and the championship MVP there in season 14, which seems like I can still picture him on the field in an Atlanta uniform.
Me too.
And I'm like, season 14, that's 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Years ago.
Yeah.
Even had a retirement stint in between them.
Right? and then he ran all over him. I won't get into it. Fort Worth, they are off to an impressive start, 2-0 once again, number one in scoring. Especially after a 45-0 win, a shutout win over Carolina. Atlanta, they looked great in week one. 3-score win over Albuquerque, an Albuquerque team that then pitched a shutout of their own in week two. So clearly Albuquerque's a decent team, and Atlanta beat them bad. But then they got handled pretty well by Minnesota last week. They lost 24-12. So interested to see what's going on there. It's another pair of teams. That we talked about in week one. There was I can't remember the matchup, but there was a matchup where the teams have been around forever. I think it was Florida and whoever Florida played. I can't remember offhand. Anyway, it was a couple of teams that played hundreds of games. Same as Fort Worth and Atlanta. They've been in the league for multiple seasons, hundreds of games between them. They've only ever met once in all of history. So bizarre, truly bizarre. Back in season 19, week 9, at Fort Worth. Fort Worth got the win in that one, 36-21. Break down this one. We'll start with Fort Worth.
Now, I'm going to ask the question, season 21 Toros, is that you?
Right.
Because that's exactly what they're looking like, right? They are giving me flashbacks of their undefeated regular season just 2 seasons ago. Number 1 in points scored and are top 9 in every offensive category. Quarterback Marcus Dunhill is number 3 in passing, number 1 in TDs. He's tied with Dynasty, who he's playing, later on tonight, and he's number 1 in QBR. Yeah. Look, they also have the number 3 rusher in the SFL and running back Jay-Z Bacon, who has already got the pot and pan sizzling and popping right out of there, right? So, and they also have the fewest turnovers in the SFL. So they are real efficient,
ticking
and
every
a
box.
Dangerous unit on offense.
Absolutely, and not to be outdone by their teammates on the offense. The defense has also been in the top of the league with number 1 total defense, number 2 scoring defense,
and that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Is this a season 21 Toros already? Because they played it just like that as well, right? Number 1 in total defense, number 2 in scoring defense. They shut out Carolina last week. We already know 45-0 in a dominant performance. Their defense already has 2 pick sixes on the season, with one being from a big man. Defensive end Jerry D. Gahn has got a pick and ran it back for a touchdown, who also has 3 sacks on the season so far. So, and they're also only allowing 36% of conversions on third down. Yeah, so they can give their, so they don't give their opponents many opportunities to do anything with the ball. But what they're doing, they're giving their offense lots of opportunities, being able to stop their opponent on third down. They're scoring a lot of points. Top team in the SFL, no disrespect to Florida, but they are playing like they are, this season is them getting to the championship.
Yeah, this looks like it could be theirs, which doesn't bode well for some other South Division teams.
I know.
Coming for you, Fort Worth. Coming for you.
They scary. I'll let them come to me, and we'll just hide in the weeds and jump out.
Yeah, like scare them with a weird 3-legged or 2-legged horse. Why would I have 3-legged? You know what? Don't answer that question. Let's get into Atlanta's offense and break that down. We already talked about it. They looked good in week 1. They did not look good in week 2.
Yeah, and look, and they did play different levels of talent the last 2 weeks, right? But it doesn't get easier tonight with Fort Worth. Nope. Quarterback Brian Dynasty will have to get back to how he actually played in week 1 to have a chance versus this type of defense. He has to be, but he still is very efficient. He is number 3 in QBR, but he has to play at a top tier, right? And look, and he is tied for the league in touchdowns, like we mentioned earlier, right? BDG has to step up and do BDG Hollywood things to help this offense rebound and get them back to the Atlanta team we know that they can be.
Number 1 running back all time in pretty much every category. See what he can do tonight. The defense, they've been fairly consistent over the past couple games. Number 7 scoring defense. Talk about that.
Yeah, and you got Grandpa Shine, and you have free agent signee Bernard Smith. Yep, he's a Smith.
Of course.
Always.
Yeah, can't go wrong
there. That name
there.
just says greatness. So we have played extremely well at linebacker position thus far and have been the strength of the defense. So they will have to lead the charge in an effort to stop this type of explosive offense this week, right? They have the talent to do so, but can they?
Well, we'll find out in just a little bit as that game is getting set to kick off. So we'll get down to the field here in just a second. But first, our picks, which I kind of want to skip this week because celebrate, yes, whatever, as you kept doing to me last season. Which of our teams won in week 1? You know what? Never mind. So yeah, for the first time in the history of our picks, you're beating me. So I'm 5-3 now on the season. You are 7-1. So at least you lost one of them. Last week you picked Minnesota, Florida, and Vancouver, and won them all. I went with Atlanta, Florida, Houston, and obviously Atlanta and Houston let me down.
You let yourself down by picking them.
I guess so. All right, so let's get into this week's picks. Vancouver at Canton. Who do you got?
I am going with Andy Hamilton and the Vancouver Legion because of how they were able to rebound. I think they go into Canton and show Canton that, hey, they are an elite team and that they can beat them, even though Canton is playing really well.
I think Vancouver is an elite team. I think they've got just as good a shot as any. I think Canton gets the win, though. They just looked so dominant last week and last season. It kind of gave me flashbacks to last season. I think maybe I'm just scared of Canton now. By the way, they're on my schedule later this season. So, yeah, I'm just scared. I'll admit it. I'm a little bit nervous about that one. I'm going with Canton. Baltimore at Minnesota.
Minnesota, they are back at home, and the way they played ball control offense, I do think they played ball control offense against Baltimore and take the win at home.
I think Baltimore is going to get the win. I think they're going to go to 3-0. Baltimore almost never loses at home, as everybody knows. They're on the road this week. They almost never lose on the road either. They just almost never lose. They're just a great team that I think is getting back to great form. Minnesota, they've had some ups and downs this season already. I think this one's a down week. Baltimore, I think, will get the win. Los Angeles at Nashville. You got a good look at Los Angeles last week.
I did, and they were a lot better than the score indicated, from my opinion, right? So, and they played really well week 1. They played really good week 2, and I think they go into Nashville and get their first win of the season. They have the pieces, they have the talent. I just think this week is the week they put it together because Nashville didn't really show me a whole lot. Their offense struggled, and I do think LA is a better team right now playing the expansion team, Nashville.
Nashville, like we talked about, struggled on offense, but that defense looked pretty good. I think that defense might just be a little bit too much for LA to overcome. Nashville gets the pick from me. So there's our picks. We actually pick completely different on every game this week, I think for the first time ever.
That means I'm going 3-0 and you're going on 3.
We're going to find out as we have our show next week. But for right now, we've got a game getting ready to kick off. Fort Worth at Atlanta, just moments away. Don't go anywhere. I saw that there was a super chat out there during the show. I will get to that during the game, so don't worry, you will get your super chat. How is Fort Worth and Atlanta going to turn out? There's only one way to find out, as Matt Willson